It's cybersecurity headlines.
NortonLifeLock warns that hackers breach password manager accounts. Ransomware revenue falls by $300 million in 2022 as more victims refuse to pay, and ChatGPT changes the phishing game. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and expertise on these stories and more from our returning guest, George Finney, the CISO at Southern Methodist University. George, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right, before we get into the stories of the day, we want to, of course, thank our sponsor, Serby, making security everyone's business. Remember, you can join us on YouTube Live. To do so, go to CISOSeries.com, hit the events dropdown, and look for the Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review image. It is the third one down. Just click on it to join us. We've got about 20 minutes, though, so let's jump into the news. First up here, NortonLifeLock warns that hackers breached password manager accounts. Gen Digital, formerly Symantec Corporation, and NortonLifeLock, those two got together and came up with that name, is sending data breach notifications to customers, informing them that threat actors have successfully breached Norton password manager accounts in credential stuffing attacks. Around December 1st, an attacker used username and password pairs they bought from the dark web to attempt to log into Norton customer accounts. Norton warns that the attackers might have obtained details stored in the private vaults. You know, George, this sounds pretty familiar to a story we covered last week with the LastPass breach. And at a time when people are still using easy to guess passwords, you know, these two events might damage the trust in the concept of password managers as well as the actual security implications. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this?
I think you got it just right. I mean, it really does damage trust. And, you know, I've been working so hard to convince people to use password managers. It's only making our jobs more difficult to get that adoption up. You know, I know I had a conversation last year with someone who was like, hey, so it doesn't make, you know, isn't putting all your passwords in a cloud just as bad as writing them down? And, you know, I think it's things like this that kind of prove the skeptics right. So, you know, I think we can do better as a security community than two in a row, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that is the timing of this. If you are in the big password manager consortium, like not ideal. What's interesting though is again, it kind of comes down, at least in this case, it comes down to humans still being that weak link though, because credential stuffing only works if you are reusing that password somewhere, right? You were just trying it everywhere and then you get a hit. So if for your password manager, you are only using that password for that, the approach is still obviously valid, right?
You know, the approach is still valid, and I think there's some other innovators out there that do have really good security. As you know, as the security communities dove in and looked at some of the alternatives, yeah, those features that are in some of the competitors really weren't there in the older password vault technologies. So, you know, definitely like with anything in security, you know, make sure you're staying up with current technologies, and you know, make sure we're staying ahead of the curve.
All right, next up here, ransomware revenue falls by $300 million in 2022 as more victims refuse to pay. That's according to a report from the blockchain research firm Chainalysis. They attribute the drop to a variety of factors, one being that more victims are simply refusing to pay up when threatened by criminal groups. The report's researchers spoke with several ransomware experts to check whether their theory was correct and seeing this kind of as an overall trend. George, other causes for the downturn in ransomware revenue include Russia's invasion of Ukraine and law enforcement actions against ransomware gangs, including things like arrests, seizures of ransom, you know, takedown of infrastructure, that kind of stuff. However, it's not like career cyber criminals are just going to, you know, hang up their hoodies and you know, green screened CRT monitors and look for new work. Should we be cautious, perhaps, about you know, celebrating a little too much about this downturn?
You know, let's just first and start by saying, you know, I love the work that Chainalysis is doing. To be able to, you know, definitively say how much, you know, ransomware money passed through the blockchain is amazing. As an aside, there's a great book about the blockchain. It's called Tracers in the Dark by Andy Greenberg. Really great deep dive into that. But gosh, like, you know, I don't want to necessarily celebrate. But we don't get enough good news in cybersecurity. So, you know, I mean, it's still $500 million. But I think things like folks, or cyber insurance companies, are maybe leading the way here, and hopefully that trend continues.
Next up here, ChatGPT changes the phishing game. Maria Korolov has an article at CSO Online about how ChatGPT is being used to craft highly convincing and grammatically correct phishing emails, even when the original message is entered in broken English. She shows how this can be then used to create more or less either casual, formal, or urgent tones, kind of customize it, essentially creating the perfect phishing emails. Of course, phishing already the market leader in terms of hacking techniques, and we have used the fact that they are often, spelled poorly as maybe an indicator of, the sign to look for, right? If you're trying to educate people on this, now this seems to be potentially disappearing. Yet at the same time, we're seeing signs that ChatGPT detection methods are coming out there. We have anti-phishing tools already emerging, kind of integrating that. I'm curious, George, where does this kind of line up with assessing this threat that we're seeing these ChatGPT being used for this?
I think if you were if you were relying on grammar and bad spelling to identify phishing before, the modern phishing doesn't have that same issues, right? The attackers are already pretty sophisticated. So I don't know that ChatGPT is really going to change the game, like the article maybe mentions. And frankly, there are already phishing detection tools out there that are using AI against the bad guys to help identify really much more sophisticated things out there. So definitely, I think that until maybe ChatGPT gets even more sophisticated, when we're looking at version 5 or 6, that I think we're more pointing to a trend of concern than really where we're at today.
It just got me think of like just AIs yelling at each other in spam filters, like for all of eternity. Just like this weird, this weird like Harlan Ellison dystopia. All right, our next story here: ransomware attack impacts 1,000 ships. Norwegian maritime company DNV said they suffered a ransomware attack on January 7th, forcing them to shut down servers connected to their ship manager system. In total, the attack impacted roughly 1,000 vessels belonging to 70 customers. DNV noted that ship manager customers can still use offline functionality and that no other DNV services were impacted. So, George, according to the DNV website, Ship Manager supports management of vessels and fleets in all technical, operational, and compliance aspects. That sounds like a really serious part of the whole, shipping industry thing, especially considering the supply chain and ecological issues with ships we've seen just with accidents happening in shipping lanes. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I reflected about the FAA outage last week, and I've not heard anything to say that was caused by a breach or anything related to cyber. But I think these highlight some of the impacts to critical infrastructure out there. I looked at the DNV site and I didn't get the impression that that this was the ships were lost at sea or anything. But again, I think it's pointing to a potential future that we can hopefully avoid.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things, though, that I mean, I think the whole shipping is increasingly in our supply chain constrained times that we live in. We're increasingly realizing like how vital that is. Obviously, anyone in logistics will have told you that for forever and is like yelling at you. Why didn't you realize this for years? But it's become so front of mind, and to see this, like, that's what made this headline really jump out to me personally. Even if the overall impact is perhaps more muted. They have a lot of redundancies on these systems, but definitely thinking about that increasingly as critical infrastructure and as a target for cyber attacks, I think definitely needs to be top of mind for sure.
Totally.
All right, before we move on, we want to spend a few moments with our sponsor, Serby. Do you know that over 60% of the cloud applications used by your company don't support identity standards like single sign-on, and that these applications are the leading cause of breaches? Serby can help. Serby discovers new applications, eliminates manual security tasks like offboarding, and addresses misconfigurations like disabled 2FA while increasing employee productivity. Wait, a security tool that increases productivity? Yep. Learn more at Cerby.com. That's CERBY.com. Bridgestone Arena enhances NHL fan safety. This comes from Nashville's Bridgestone Arena, home of the Nashville Predators, and hosts events such as the Country Music Association Awards and other events. It's recently installed 14 Evolve Express security screening systems at its various ingress points. The system uses a combination of AI and sensor technology to provide threat detection at high volumes and speed, which would be required at such a large venue. This, they say, produces operational efficiency and, quote, most importantly, happier and safer guests. Bridgestone, of course, is not the only arena to have successfully deployed this technology, but alongside the safety benefits of protecting, lots of people in an enclosed space, there are stories of people being barred from performances because they do things like work for law firms that are suing theater owners or something like that. I'm curious, George, do you feel the benefits outweigh the risk to perhaps personal privacy on these kind of systems?
My initial thought was, oh my gosh. I mean, we always, so I support a police department in my professional role. Life safety always trumps other considerations, right? And what the security systems or salespeople out there will say is, we're making the humans on the ground more effective, right? They can help make the organization, the facility, whatever, more secure. And I know that we've been pitched AI, for facial recognition for 4 or 5, 6 years now, and we really need the AI companies to help settle some of these issues around privacy, right? Because the reality is we know we need them, and we want to be able to deploy them in a safe way. And we're gosh, I just think this whole article just begs the need to have that national conversation with everyone.
Yeah, and I think the grounding point, and I'm not saying Evolve is particularly egregious in this, but that transparency becomes the touchstone for all of this when it comes to data sets that are used to train this. So, we're looking at things like bias, and not to say that we can ever fully eliminate, but at least understand where that bias lies and try and compensate, understanding the scale of the problem as opposed to here is scary sounding article about AI doing bad things, but we
Exactly.
don't know.
I mean, and it's not just the bias of the data sets. It's the bias of the camera chips that created the data
Yeah,
sets.
absolutely.
And then there are the privacy concerns about just being out in public. And like with driver's license plate recognition, are they going to be collecting those faces, and how long do they collect them? As they were walking by, right? All of those issues are kind of fraught. And there needs to be, I think, better guidance or better conversations around all of those particular use or misuse cases.
Next up here, CircleCI breach caused by infostealer. The continuous integration platform confirmed it experienced a data breach on January 4th. Infostealing malware on an employee laptop resulted in the leaked data. Attackers were able to access some production systems. CircleCI encrypted the access data. It was while it was at rest, but the attacker extracted encryption keys from a running process. The company says it's closed the attack vector and added additional layers of security. Once again, though, a real world example of how effective info stealing malware can be. It's often kind of just mentioned as something that's dropped when someone downloads a malicious app, just kind of an afterthought almost to the actual intrusion vector. But, here we see the very real world outcomes. George, do you feel that people are overall giving this type of malware sufficient attention?
I think cases like this really highlight it. And I think ransomware has dominated the headlines so much that we need to just keep in mind there are other kind of new vectors coming out all the time. It's not just about protecting against ransomware.
All right, next up here, too many admin 1234 passwords still exist in industrial system, research finds. I would assume that means more than one. According to research released Wednesday, operators of critical infrastructure companies aren't updating off-the-shelf security credentials in internet devices connected to industrial systems. Roya Gordon, security research evangelist at Nozomi Networks, a cybersecurity firm that specializes in industrial security, said, "We're seeing a lot of admin 1234, meaning that hackers are still going to use default credentials in hopes that no one is changing them for IoT devices," which is pretty accurate. George, this seems to be one of those stories where there's kind of no need for an actual question. I just need to put on my glasses here, stare down my nose in kind of disapproving fashion here. We know admins are very busy people. So how do we make for the simplest of simple table stakes security practices not being followed? How do you take that?
Frankly, this is a leadership issue, right? It's not just a system admin that's too busy. We've got to be asking the question, like, did a pen test or config review not find this at some point? Are you even doing those? Are you asking your teams, what your patching cadence is, or are we using hardened default passwords? Oh my gosh, I mean, yeah. This isn't just again, we can't just blame the intern here. We've got to think about all of the factors about being understaffed or focusing on other things that are jeopardizing security, basic security.
This is what boggles my mind, is that this has been this conversation about like industrial IoT and securing all these additional inputs. This is an old conversation, right? Like this feels like a 2016 kind of like, this is what's going to happen, but this is not new. Like that's very interesting that it's a leadership issue. I almost feel like we use the term shadow IT a lot, obviously, to mean like unexpected, like cloud instances and stuff. But this also feels like someone threw in this IoT device and it solved a problem, and they got somebody to clear it on the network and never looked at the config screen or something.
Yeah, and again, this is still critical infrastructure, right? This is industrial control stuff. We've been so concerned about this since the first Ukraine invasion, right? We've had time to think about this.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, we're going to close this out here with vendors bypassing security patches. The security firm Sansec warns that some e-commerce vendors began bypassing security patches for mail templates in Adobe Commerce and Magento. These patches date back to February, fixing an actively exploited bug in the checkout process. Part of the patch saw Adobe remove the smart mail templates and introducing a mail template variable resolver to prevent injection attacks. That last part seems to be causing an issue, with some vendors seeking to reintroduce the functionality of the old template resolver into production Magento stores, often just by copying the old code, which, of course, Sansec warns effectively reintroduces the security flaw. So, all right, let me get the glasses back out here. We seem to be having a theme here, not just this episode, but when you've got humans involved in here, humans are going to human, and when there's inconvenience, they're going to seek to avoid them. I actually can't read while I have those glasses on. Of course, bad guys just love all of this stuff. Do you see any way to get people to understand that defenses are put in place for a reason? Or is this, I guess, it goes back to a larger organizational concern, right? Where the function of the business is not speaking to the function of IT or security.
In my spare time, I'm an attorney, and I got to feel like this is de facto negligence, right? So if I'm if I'm looking for a class action lawsuit, like this is a great one to go find those vendors that bypass the security patches, every time, as a business owner, right? You're taking on a risk, right? If you're committing negligence by working around security patches. Man, that's ballsy. So, but wow, I don't even know how to respond to that.
The only way I can justify it is someone complained that template was missing, and someone's like, wait a minute, all I need to do is copy this thing over and it works. Not real. Like, I have to imagine that someone didn't realize the implication of, oh, I just need to replace this. Oh, old template resolver.exe was missing. I just need to bring this over and everything works magically. Also, where are we getting this weird traffic on our network now? Oh no. Like, that's the only way it makes sense to me, right?
Again, I'm just totally confused as to bypassing security patches. Seems like we can do better than that.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, was there any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller for you in today's rundown?
I was thinking back, ransomware, going down. How many times do we have a cyber headline where things have improved, even if just slightly? So let's go with a thumbs up for ransomware revenue falling.
I like it. A positive note to end the week in review. There's a first for everything. George Finney, thank you so much for being on the show. Of course, the CISO at Southern Methodist University. Where can people find you on cyberspace if they're so inclined?
So check out my new book. It's the #1 selling book in the world on Zero Trust, Project Zero Trust. You can also check me out on my website, wellawaresecurity.com.
Excellent. Excellent. And we will also have a post or a link to your LinkedIn and all of your pertinent information in the show notes. So check that out. Thank you also to our sponsor, Serby, making security everyone's business. A reminder to join us next week for Super Cyber Friday. Our topic of discussion will be hacking cloud forensics, an hour of critical thinking about conducting incident response in complex and transient data environments. That'll be followed by the Week in Review show. In the meantime, you can still get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Every single day, give us about 6 minutes. We'll get you all caught up. You can also subscribe to the show through our newsletter on LinkedIn. There you can read and hear the show right from your inbox. Just go to CISO Series page on LinkedIn to subscribe. And if you're in the DC area this Monday, January 23rd, come on out and meet David Spark, the head honcho of the CISO Series. He'll be holding an after-work meetup at the World of Beer in Bethesda. Just go to the event page at CISOseries.com for all of the info. I'm Richard Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOseries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.